Stephen Stainer was the third of 5 children born to Delbert and Kay Stainer in Merced, California. Stephen's siblings included 3 sisters and an older brother named Carrie. On the afternoon of December 4th, 1972, 7-year-old Stephen was walking home from school when he was approached by a man named Irvin Edward Murphy. Irvin was the accomplice of a convicted child named Kenneth Parnell, but not through any fault of his own. Those who knew Irvin described him as naive, trusting, and simple-minded, and Kenneth had convinced him that he was an aspiring minister. Irvin's job was to abduct a young boy in order to raise them in a religious household. Irvin believed that he was doing charitable work by abducting young boys for his friend, and he had no idea what the reality was. When he approached Stephen, Irvin claimed that he was a church representative who was seeking donations. He asked if Stephen's mother would be willing to donate anything to the church, and Stephen replied that she would be willing to do so. Irvin then asked where Stephen lived and if he would take him home. After this, Kenneth pulled up in a white Buick and Stephen climbed into the car. Kenneth drove to his cabin in Cathy's Valley, which was located just a few hundred feet away from the home of Stephen's maternal grandfather. Stephen was unaware of this coincidence, and he thought that he had nowhere to run. Kenneth began essaying Stephen, and Stephen told him repeatedly that he just wanted to go home. Kenneth claimed that he had legal custody of Stephen because his parents could no longer afford him and did not want him. Kenneth called Stephen Dennis Gregory Parnell, a name that he used to get Stephen enrolled at various schools over the course of the next few years. Kenneth pretended to be Stephen's father, and they moved around California numerous times. He allowed the boy to start drinking far too young, and he even allowed Stephen to come and go as he pleased. The risk of Stephen running away was extremely low because of the fact that Stephen thought his family had abandoned him, so if he ran away, he would become homeless and destitute. He was also unaware of how to summon help. Kenneth worked various menial jobs during this time. By sheer coincidence, Stephen's mother gave Kenneth a Manchester Terrier, which Kenneth then presented to Stephen as a gift. Stephen's mother had no idea that Kenneth was holding her son against his will, nor did she know that Stephen was alive to begin with. Between 1974 and 1975, a woman named Barbara Mathias lived with Kenneth and Stephen. According to Stephen, Barbara joined in on the essay. Under Kenneth's orders, Barbara attempted to lure another boy into Kenneth's car, but she was unsuccessful. She claimed that she did not know Stephen had been kidnapped. During his time with Kenneth, Stephen was forced to help with the kidnapping attempts. Stephen was entering puberty at this time, and Kenneth wanted younger boys to abuse. He believed that he would be able to use Stephen as his next accomplice, but Stephen was braver and smarter than Kenneth realized. Instead of simply going along with his captor's plans, Stephen actively sabotaged every single kidnapping attempt in which he was involved without Kenneth noticing. Kenneth simply thought that Stephen was incompetent. Despite his cunning, Stephen was unable to sabotage all the kidnappings. On February 14th of 1980, Kenneth and a teenage friend of his named Randall Sean Poorman successfully abducted a 5-year-old boy named Timothy White from Ukiah, California. Kenneth presented Timothy as Stephen's brother, but Stephen knew what their captor had in store for the young boy. He was determined not to let Kenneth hurt Timothy like he himself had been hurt, so he decided to escape and return the boy to his family. On March 1st of 1980, while Kenneth was at his night security job, Stephen left the house with Timothy and the pair hiked into Ukiah, California. They failed to reach Timothy's house, so they went to a police station instead. By the next day, Kenneth was arrested and the police checked his record. He had a prior sodomy conviction from 1951, and he was tried and convicted of kidnapping both Stephen and Timothy in 1981. Kenneth was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but he was paroled after just 5. Kenneth was never charged with SA because most of those incidents had either occurred outside the Merced County prosecutor's jurisdiction or were outside the statute of limitations. Irvin and Randall were both convicted on lesser charges for their involvement in the kidnappings, and Barbara was never arrested at all. Stephen remembered the kindness that Irvin had treated him with during his first week in captivity. According to Stephen, Irvin was just as much a victim of Kenneth's manipulation as he himself was. Stephen had a very difficult time adjusting to normal life. He said, "I returned almost a grown man, and yet my parents saw me at first as their 7-year-old. After they stopped trying to teach me the fundamentals all over again, it got better. But why doesn't my dad hug me anymore? Everything has changed. Sometimes I blame myself. I don't know sometimes if I should have come home. Would I have been better off if I didn't?" Stephen went through counseling for a very brief time, but his father told him that he didn't need it, so he stopped going. He was bullied at school because of the essay he had endured, and he eventually dropped out. He developed a drinking problem and was kicked out of the family home. In 1985, Stephen married a woman named Jody, and they had 2 children together. Stephen worked with child abduction groups to help prevent kidnappings, and he spoke to children about safety. On September 16th of 1989, Stephen was driving his motorcycle home from work when a car turned in front of him and struck him. Stephen sustained fatal head injuries from the accident, and he perished as a result. The driver of the car, Antonio Laura, was later identified by witnesses, and he was sentenced to 3 months in prison for the hit and run, but he was found not guilty of manslaughter. There were 500 guests at Stephen's funeral, and Timothy White was a pallbearer. In 2004, Kenneth was accused and convicted of paying his caretaker's sister $500 to abduct a young boy for him. Timothy testified against Kenneth at the trial, and Kenneth was given 25 years to life in prison. He passed away from natural causes at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville on January 21st of 2008. Timothy became a deputy for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office, and he passed away on April 1st of 2010 at age 35 from a pulmonary embolism, which is a medical condition in which an artery in the lungs gets blocked by a substance that has moved through the bloodstream. However, this case isn't done just yet. The Stainer family had one more nasty surprise to go through. In February of 1999, 42-year-old Carol Sund and her 15-year-old daughter Julie were on vacation with a 16-year-old foreign exchange student named Silvina Peloso. They were staying at the Cedar Lodge in El Portal, California, near Yosemite National Park. They mysteriously vanished during their stay, and the police launched an investigation. The next month, their rental car was found torched in a remote area several hours away from the motel with the charred corpses of Carol and Silvina in the trunk. Shortly after this discovery, the police received a letter that read, "We had fun with this one." In addition, the letter contained directions to Julie's body, which was located about an hour away from the rental car. Police interviewed numerous people during the investigation, including Cary Stainer, Stephen's older brother. Cary worked as a handyman at the Cedar Lodge, but the police did not suspect him of being involved in the triple murder. However, this would eventually change. On July 22nd of 1999, the decapitated body of a 26-year-old Yosemite naturalist named Joey Armstrong was found near the cabin she had been living in. Police learned about a car that had been seen at the cabin on the day in question, and they traced the vehicle to Cary Stainer. During an interrogation, Cary confessed to murdering all 4 victims, and he pled guilty to the following charges in relation to Joey's murder: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and attempted aggravated essay. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At his second trial, Cary was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of kidnapping, and he was sentenced to death. As of 2023, which is the most recent source I was able to find, Cary was 62 years old and still living on death row. Ariel Castro was born to Pedro Castro and Lillian Rodriguez in Puerto Rico on July 10th of 1960. His parents divorced during his childhood, and he moved to the United States with Lillian and his 3 siblings. They initially lived in Reading, Pennsylvania, but eventually settled in Cleveland, Ohio, where Pedro was living at the time. Throughout his childhood, Pedro was repeatedly essayed and physically abused. His mother would strike him with belts, sticks, and her hands. Ariel attended Lincoln West High School in Cleveland, and he met a girl named Grimilda when his family moved into a house that was across the street from her family's residence. The two started dating, and they moved in together in 1992. According to Grimilda's sister, Alida, all hell broke loose after the move. Ariel allegedly beat Grimilda, breaking her nose, ribs, and arms, and even causing a blood clot on her brain. This clot would eventually result in a tumor. In 1993, Ariel was arrested for domestic violence, but he was not indicted by a grand jury, so he walked free. In 1996, Grimilda moved out of the house and obtained custody of all 4 of their children. The police detained Ariel and even helped Grimilda with the move. Despite this separation, Ariel was not about to let Grimilda out of his life. In 2005, Grimilda filed charges in the Cuyahoga County Domestic Relations Court, accusing Ariel of inflicting severe injuries on her, as well as abducting their children frequently. The court granted her a restraining order, but it was dismissed just a few months later. Grimilda passed away from complications with the brain tumor in 2012. Ariel was fired from his job as a bus driver for the Cleveland Metropolitan School District that same year for exhibiting what his higher-ups described as bad judgment. One specific incident involved Ariel making an illegal U-turn with numerous infants and toddlers in his vehicle. If all of this seems bad, it's only going to get worse. Ariel wasn't just a menace to his family and on the job, he was a genuine monster in every aspect of his life, including his hobbies. One of Ariel's favorite pastimes was kidnapping women and holding them captive in his home. On August 23rd of 2002, 21-year-old Michelle Knight disappeared after leaving her cousin's house. She was scheduled for a court hearing in a child custody case, but she never showed up. The police investigated her disappearance, but they initially suspected that she had run away, so they didn't put in an adequate amount of effort. On April 21st of 2003, Amanda Berry was last heard from at around 8 p.m. when she called her sister to tell her that she had secured a ride home from her job at Burger King. It was the day before her 17th birthday. The police suspected that Amanda had run away, but this changed when her cell phone was used to call her mother, and the voice belonged to a man. He stated that he had Amanda in his custody and she would be returned to her family in a few days. The final kidnapping occurred on April 2nd of 2004 when 14-year-old Gina DeJesus was last seen at a payphone at around 3 p.m. while heading home from school. At this time, Gina was friends with Ariel's daughter, Arlene, and the two girls had called Grimilda to ask for permission to have a sleepover at Gina's house. Grimilda said no, and the two girls went their separate ways, after which Gina went missing. She had believed that Ariel was giving her a ride home, and she trusted him because he was her friend's father, but Ariel had other plans. Nobody witnessed the abduction, and no Amber Alert was ever issued. Gina's father said, "The Amber Alert should work for any missing child. Whether it's an abduction or a runaway, a child needs to be found. We need to change this law." The conditions of captivity at Ariel's house were horrendous. He took Michelle to the upper floor, where he tied her hands and feet together before pulling her off the floor to dangle in the air. He left Michelle in that position without any food for 3 days straight, and the testimony from the victims alleged that Ariel had committed SA, abuse, and treated his victims like animals. He kept them in locked bedrooms and forced them to use plastic toilets, which he rarely emptied. At most, he would feed them 1 meal per day and allow them to shower twice per week. Michelle told the police that Ariel impregnated her 5 separate times and induced miscarriages each time via starvation and vicious beatings. By the end of her captivity, Michelle had lost hearing in 1 ear and required facial reconstruction surgery. One incident involved Michelle's dog, which attempted to defend its owner, but Ariel snapped its neck after it bit him. Amanda and Gina underwent much of the same treatment. On Christmas Day of 2006, Ariel commanded Michelle to help Amanda give birth to her child. This home birth took place in an inflatable pool, and Ariel threatened to murder them if the baby died. Despite a brief loss of breathing, the baby survived and Ariel raised it as his own. In 2013, he showed a picture of the child to one of his grown daughters, telling her that the little girl was his girlfriend's daughter from a previous relationship. He told other people that she was his granddaughter. Amanda taught her daughter how to read and write herself. Police officers visited Ariel's home once to discuss an unrelated incident, but he wasn't home at the time. They did not see any suspicious activity at the house, so they left without entering. Ariel's neighbors claimed that they had called the police on several occasions to report suspicious activity at the house, but the police claimed that they had no records of any such calls. Ariel's son, Anthony, found it strange that there were certain parts of the house that his father kept locked at all times. At one point, Ariel asked Anthony if he thought that Amanda Berry would ever be found, to which Anthony replied that he thought she was most likely already dead. Ariel responded, "Really? You think so?" On the morning of May 6, 2013, Amanda was finally able to make contact with Ariel's neighbors, which allowed her to escape with her daughter. Ariel had left the house without locking one of the interior doors that he usually kept locked, although the exterior doors were all still locked. According to Amanda, Ariel had tested his victims on several occasions by leaving the house unlocked and unsecured to see whether or not they would try to escape. If they did, he would beat them. Therefore, Amanda did not try to break through the exterior doors, but instead she yelled at the top of her lungs to the neighbors, who she could see through a window screen. According to Amanda's memoir, a neighbor named Angel Cordero was the first person to hear the screaming, but he only spoke Spanish and could not communicate with Amanda. Another neighbor named Charles Ramsey arrived, and together with Amanda he kicked a hole through the bottom of the exterior door. Amanda and her daughter then crawled through the hole. Once they were free, Charles called the police, who arrived at Ariel's house with guns drawn. When they entered the upstairs, Michelle and Gina emerged from their rooms. All three women, plus Amanda's daughter, were taken to the hospital. In the aftermath of the rescue, the investigations of the disappearances were brought into question. Michelle had been removed from the National Crime Information Center database 15 months after her abduction, which the Cleveland Police Department and FBI both insist had no effect on the case, but others believe that it reduced the amount of attention she received, which caused fewer tips to be given in the search effort. Amanda received significantly more attention in the media, being profiled in several television programs, but a self-proclaimed psychic named Sylvia Brown told Amanda's mother that she was dead. This lie absolutely devastated Amanda's mother, who removed all of her daughter's pictures from her house and gave away her computer. She passed away from heart failure in 2006 and never saw her daughter again, nor did she ever get to meet her grandchild. Amanda's daughter was confirmed through DNA testing to be Ariel's. There was also a prison inmate named Robert Wolford who claimed that he knew the location of Amanda's body, and he led the police to an empty lot in Cleveland in July of 2012. Since Amanda was still alive, the search effort turned up nothing, and Robert was sentenced to 4.5 additional years for obstruction of justice, making a false report and making a false alarm. Gina's family hosted several vigils for her, which Ariel attended. He also participated in a search effort for her, and he did everything he could to become close with Gina's family. Ariel's son, Anthony, was a journalism student in 2004, and he interviewed Gina's family about her disappearance. Ariel himself was arrested in a McDonald's parking lot shortly after the rescue of his victims, and he was charged with 4 counts of kidnapping as well as 3 counts of 2 of his brothers were also taken into custody, but it was determined that they had no involvement in the abductions or captivity, so they were released without being charged. Ariel's first court appearance was on May 9th of 2013, and his bail was set at $8 million. The prosecution was hoping to get the death penalty for him, and there were a few additional charges that they wanted to add, including attempted murder and assault. On June 7th of that year, a grand jury indicted Ariel on 329 counts, including 2 counts of aggravated murder for the forceful termination of his victims' pregnancies. This indictment only covered the period between August of 2002 and February of 2007, and any further discoveries could potentially result in even more charges being brought against Ariel. Ariel pled not guilty, and his lawyers stated that they wanted to avoid a trial because it would be emotionally straining for the victims, their families, and the community. On July 12th, a grand jury indicted Ariel on counts following February of 2007, and this brought the total of criminal counts up to 977. The prosecutors had tried to get individual counts of kidnapping added to the list for each day that the victims were held in captivity. There were 512 counts of kidnapping, 446 counts of 7 counts of gross sexual imposition, 6 counts of felonious assault, 3 counts of child endangerment, 2 counts of aggravated murder, and 1 count of possession of criminal tools. Ariel pled not guilty to the second indictment as well. If he was convicted of all charges, he would be executed via lethal injection. On July 26th, Ariel changed his tune as a result of a plea deal. He pled guilty to 937 charges in exchange for several consecutive life sentences, plus 1,000 years, without the possibility of parole. In addition, Ariel forfeited his rights to appeal the conviction, gave up all of his assets, and was prohibited from making any sort of profit from his crimes. At his sentencing trial, Ariel launched into a 20-minute speech in which he blamed the FBI for failing to catch him, blamed his victims for getting into his car, claimed that the sex was all consensual, claimed that he had never physically abused his victims, and apologized for his crimes. Nobody was convinced, and the victims themselves were given a chance to speak. Michelle said, "You took 11 years of my life away. I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning. I will overcome all that has happened, but you will face hell for eternity. I will live on. You will die a little every day as you think of the 11 years of atrocities that you inflicted on us. I can forgive you, but I will never forget. Ariel's house was demolished on August 7th of 2013, and as of 2018, a park with a garden had replaced it. Ariel himself was found hanging from a bedsheet in his cell on September 3rd of 2013, only 1 month into his sentence. The monster decided to take the easy way out instead of facing the consequences of his actions. I don't think anybody misses him. In fact, Anthony refused to visit his father in prison, and he despised sharing the same surname.